The Galactica's FTL drive screamed through its final spin-up, and for one nauseating heartbeat, the whole ship seemed to fold in on itself. When the stars snapped back into focus, Lieutenant Felix Gaeta already knew something was wrong. "That's not our sky," he said quietly, staring at the Dratus readout. On the command deck, Admiral William Adama gripped the rail hard enough to whiten his knuckles.
"Talk to me, Mr. Gaeta."
"Stellar cartography doesn't match anything in the almanac, sir. Not even close. And I'm reading." Gaeta paused, recalibrating. "Over 400 contacts within scanner range. Comm traffic everywhere. Structured, encoded, non-colonial." Colonel Saul Tighe straightened like a man smelling an ambush. "Silence? No if matched to anything we've logged. Whatever this is, it isn't them. It isn't us either." Adama exhaled slowly. Behind him, President Laura Roslin had already stepped onto the deck, wrapped in the calm she wore like armor, even when her hands trembled at her sides. "Bill," she said, low enough for only him to hear. "How far did we jump?" "I don't know yet." He turned back to Gaeta. "Get me a fix, and find out if the fleet made the jump with us." "Fleet's accounted for, Admiral. All 42 ships, minus drift. Forming up now." "Small mercy." Adama allowed himself one breath of relief before the next problem announced itself. "Sir," Gaeta said, voice tightening. "New contact. Big one. Bearing 010 closing fast. It's not on any profile I have." On the screen, a shape resolved that looked like nothing in colonial design philosophy. A saucer married to a sweeping hull, running lights soft and civilian-looking, utterly unlike the jagged aggression of a Cylon base star. "Options?" Roslin asked. "Set condition 2 through the fleet," Adama said. "Launch a cap, but tell them weapons tight until we know what we're looking at. I want eyes, not a fight." Down in the pilot-ready room, the call to scramble sent Starbuck out of her chair before the tone had even finished. "Guess breakfast's over," she muttered to Apollo, snapping her flight helmet under one arm. "You think it's a new model?" "I think we don't know what it is," which is exactly the problem. Apollo checked the charge on his sidearm out of habit more than need. "Dad wants eyes, not a fight. So let's give him eyes." They launched into a sky full of unfamiliar stars. 2 Vipers, cutting formation against a backdrop that belonged to no chart either of them had memorized. Starbuck keyed her comm. "Galactica Starbuck, I've got visual on the contact. It's pretty." "Come again, Starbuck?" Gaeta's voice half amused despite himself. "I said it's pretty. Big saucer thing, running lights like it's dressed for a party. Doesn't look like it's spoiling for a fight. Could be wrong." "Copy. Hold position, maintain visual, weapons tight." "Copy that. Holding." A pause. "Apollo, you seeing this?" "Yeah," he said quietly, watching the Enterprise grow steadily larger in his canopy, running lights soft against the dark. "I'm seeing it." Aboard the Enterprise, Lieutenant Commander Data looked up from his console with the particular stillness that meant something had genuinely surprised him. "Captain, sensors are registering a sudden subspace disturbance consistent with an extremely high yield, faster-than-light transit, but the signature does not match warp drive nor any known form of transwarp or slipstream technology. 43 vessels have appeared 4 light-years inside Federation space, bearing 321 Mark 7. Captain Jean-Luc Picard set down his tea. 43 ships arriving from nowhere tends to get one's attention, Mr. Data. Composition? 1 large vessel of clearly military design, extensive armor plating, minimal energy signature suggesting non-standard propulsion, possibly nuclear pulse detonation based on residual radiation traces. The remainder appear to be civilian. Freighters, tankers, and what may be habitation vessels in poor repair. Life signs are substantial. I estimate the civilian population at approximately 50,000. Riker, at Picard's shoulder, raised an eyebrow. 50,000 refugees and one warship. A refugee fleet, Picard murmured. Or an evacuation. Counselor? Deanna Troi had gone very quiet, her eyes distant in the way that always made the bridge crew fall silent around her. Captain, I'm getting something even at this range. It's faint, but it's enormous. Grief, exhaustion, fear that's been sustained so long it's become part of who they are. Whatever happened to these people, it wasn't a single tragedy. It's been going on for a long time. Data, hail them. Standard first. Contact protocol. All bands. Hailing, sir. A pause. No response on any Federation frequency. However, I am picking up internal transmissions. Their communications appear to be unencrypted by our standards. I can attempt translation. Do it. Gently. Mr. Data. The last thing these people need is to think they're being spied upon by whatever chased them here. Worf, from Tactical, had said nothing yet, but his hands had not left the console. Captain, 2 small craft have launched from the lead vessel. Fighters. They are holding position, weapons cold, but they are watching us. As we would in their place, Picard said. Do not raise shields, Mr. Worf. I want us to arrive as we mean to continue openly. Understood, sir. A beat. I recommend increasing sensor resolution on their fighters regardless, just to know what we are dealing with. Granted. Back on Galactica, Gaeta's console lit with an alert that made him sit bolt upright. Admiral, that ship just hailed us! Multiple frequencies, all at once, like they were trying every channel we might use. Put it through, Adama said. The voice that came over the speakers was measured, careful, entirely without malice, but it was the strangeness of it, more than anything, that put every hand on the deck near a weapon. Unidentified fleet. This is Captain Jean, Luc Picard, of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You have entered Federation space. We mean you no harm. Please respond. Ty's hand had drifted to the comm panel, ready to cut it. Adama held up 2 fingers. Wait. Federation, Rosalind repeated softly. Bill, in 11 years of history books, that word appears exactly nowhere. Neither does anything else about this place. Adama keyed his own comm, choosing his words like a man diffusing something. Enterprise. This is Admiral William Adama, Battlestar Galactica, commanding a civilian fleet under my protection. We are not looking for a fight. We don't know where we are, and until we do, my cap stays armed. Copy? Copy, Admiral. Understood completely. Would you be willing to meet in person, if your customs allow it? I'd like very much to understand who you are, and how we can help. Adama glanced at Rosalind. She gave the faintest nod. We'll meet, Adama said. But it happens on Galactica. My ship, my terms. Until I have a reason to trust otherwise. There was a pause on the other end. Not offense, Adama noted, but something like respect. Agreed, Admiral. We'll come to you. Out in the black, Starbuck let out a low whistle over the comm. Apollo, they're pulling back their approach vector. Slowing down. That's actually kind of polite of them. Don't get comfortable, Apollo said. Polite got a lot of people killed on the day the worlds burned. Yeah, well. Starbuck banked her Viper into a lazy turn, eyes never leaving the saucer-shaped ship. So did Paranoid. I'm allowed to notice pretty and polite both. Doesn't mean I trust it. Picard chose his landing party with care. Himself, Riker, Troi, and Data, enough authority to matter, enough warmth to reassure, and enough analytical capacity to make sense of whatever they found. Worf argued for a full security detail and lost. Picard wanted this fleet to see diplomats, not soldiers. Captain, Worf pressed one last time in the turbolift down to the transporter room. You are proposing to beam into the heart of an armed, frightened, unfamiliar fleet with no tactical escort. I am proposing to greet frightened people the way I would want to be greeted, Mr. Worf. If I arrive surrounded by armed guards, I confirm every fear they already have about us. Trust begins with the first gesture, or it begins nowhere at all. Worf's jaw worked, but he said nothing further. It was, Riker reflected privately, as close as Worf ever came to agreeing under protest. The transporter room hummed. Riker frowned at the specs Data had assembled during the beam-over prep. No transporter technology on their side. No replicators. Half these ships are barely holding pressure. Whatever they've been through, it's been the hard way. Then we tread carefully, Picard said, and we listen before we explain. They materialized in Galactica's boarding bay to a wall of armed Marines and the unmistakable posture of people who had learned through bitter experience not to trust anything that arrived without warning. Colonel Ty stood at the front, one eye narrowed, arms crossed. You're the one who beamed instead of using a shuttle, Ty said flatly. Cylons can do things like that too. Copy themselves right into a room. I assure you, Colonel, Picard said evenly. We are quite singular and quite human or betazoid, Klingon, and android in this case. May I ask what a Cylon is? Ty's jaw tightened, but it was Adama who answered, stepping forward with Roslin at his side. Machines! Built by us 40 years ago. They rebelled, disappeared, came back, and wiped out our 12 worlds. 20 billion people, gone in a day. Everyone you see on these ships is what's left of the human race. The bridge went quiet. Troy felt it land on her like a physical weight, not just Adama's grief, but the whole fleet's radiating out through the hull plating itself. She had counseled survivors of colonial wars, refugees of border conflicts, the traumatized crews of ships lost to the Borg, and still this was heavier than anything she had touched in years. I am so sorry, Picard said, and meant it fully enough that even Ty's shoulders eased a fraction. We had no knowledge of your people, your worlds, or this Cylon threat. You have my word, and the word of the United Federation of Planets, that we intend nothing but assistance. Roslin extended a hand, an old colonial gesture, Data logged with quiet fascination. Laura Roslin, I am president of the 12 colonies. What's left of them? Jean-Luc Picard, he said, taking it. And for what it's worth, Madam President, you have found space that, for now, is safe. For now, Adama repeated, testing the words like they might be a trick. You'll forgive me if I don't relax. I wouldn't ask you to, Picard said. Trust, in my experience, is earned in increments. Let's start with the first one. Will you permit my chief medical officer to assist yours? Counselor Troy tells me your people are carrying more than physical wounds. Adama looked to Roslin. She nodded once. Doc Cottle doesn't share his sickbay easily, Adama said, but I think even he'd take the help. Data, who had been quietly observing the exchange with the particular attentiveness he reserved for anything genuinely new, tilted his head toward Ty. Colonel, might I ask you referred to the Cylons as capable of resembling humans exactly? Is this a recent development, or has it always been the case? Ty's eye narrowed further. Why do you want to know? Because if it is true, it represents an infiltration risk unlike any my databanks have on record, and I would rather understand the danger than dismiss it. The bluntness of it, no flattery, no diplomatic softening, seemed to catch Ty off guard more than anything Picard had said. 10 years ago, we didn't know it either, he said finally. Found out the hard way. So forgive me if I don't warm up to a machine asking me questions about it. That is a reasonable position, Data said, entirely without offense. I am not offended by your caution, Colonel. I would consider it a design flaw in myself if I were. Ty stared at him for a long moment, then made a noise that might, in a better mood, have been a laugh. Yeah, okay. You're a strange one. I have been told this many times, Data said. I have come to consider it a compliment. Dr. Beverly Crusher stepped off the shuttle that ferried supplies over and found Dr. Cottle exactly where the layout schematic said he'd be chain-smoking 2 meters from an oxygen line, glaring at her like she'd personally insulted him. You're not supposed to smoke near that, she said by way of introduction. You're not supposed to be on my ship, Cottle rasped. But here we both are. She almost laughed. Beverly Crusher, Cottle. Don't touch anything. Don't ask about triage priorities. And if you're squeamish about radiation burns, this isn't the place for you. Crusher's tricorder was already reading the patient nearest her malnutrition. Chronic stress markers, a fracture set with equipment decades behind Federation medicine but set correctly, competently, by someone who clearly done this 1,000 times with nothing to spare. You've been doing extraordinary work with what you have, she said, and she wasn't being polite. It was simply true. Cottle grunted, unmoved, but he didn't argue. We don't get replacements out here. You learn to make do. He eyed her tricorder. That thing tell you anything useful? Or is it just for show? It could tell you a great deal, if you'll let it. She held it out, screen angled toward him. No obligation. Consider it a second opinion. He studied the readout for a long moment, real interest breaking through the gruffness, then took the tricorder from her hand without asking permission, exactly like she suspected he would. Huh, he said. All right, Doctor. Let's see what your toys can do. They worked side by side through the next hour, and something in the rhythm of it, the particular language too exhausted. Competent doctors speak to each other regardless of what era or empire trained them, began to thaw the room's suspicion by degrees. Cottle stopped hovering. A young corpsman, watching Crusher tend a burn victim with a gentleness that cost her nothing to give, quietly refilled her water without being asked. You've got a whole ship of these, Cottle said eventually, nodding at her tricorder. Machines that heal people instead of hunting them. We do. Must be nice. He said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than if he had. Our machines learn to pray before they learn to stop killing us. Crusher set down her instrument and looked at him directly. I can't imagine what that's been like for you. Any of you. No, Cottle agreed. Lighting another cigarette, he had no business lighting in a sick bay. You can't. But you're trying, and most people who show up out of nowhere don't bother trying at all. So, he exhaled smoke toward the ceiling vent, deliberately away from her. I'll take the help. In Galactica's pilot ready room, Kara Starbuck Thrace had her boots up on a table and a deck of cards in hand when Commander William Riker ducked through the hatch, trailed by a curious-looking Lieutenant Worf. Heard you fly fighters, Starbuck said, not looking up. Heard you don't have any. We have shuttlecraft, Riker said, and a few fighter analogs we don't often need. Sounds boring. Worf's low growl might have been offense or might have been amusement. It was hard to tell. Boredom is preferable to the alternative, pilot. Starbuck finally looked up, sizing him up with the frank assessment of someone who measured people by whether she'd want them flying her wing. You look like you could take a hit. What are you? Security. Chief of Security. Klingon. Never heard of it. You any good in a fight? Worf's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but close. I have never lost a bar brawl. Bar brawl's not a dogfight. No, Worf agreed. It is harder. Starbuck laughed a real laugh, short and surprised out of her, the first one in longer than she wanted to admit. She kicked a chair out from under the table. Sit down, Worf. Not boring. Tell me about these Klingons. Anybody who thinks bar fights are harder than combat sounds like my kind of people. Riker pulled up a chair of his own, more relaxed than the formality of first contact usually allowed. Your Viper handling out there was impressive. Tight formation, minimal fuel burn-on approach. You fly like someone who's done it under fire. Everybody who's still alive flies like that, Starbuck said, shuffling her cards without really looking at them. You don't get sloppy twice. First time's a lesson, second time's a funeral. How many pilots have you lost? The question landed harder than Riker meant it to, and he saw it in the brief flicker across her face before she covered it with a shrug. Enough that I stopped writing the names down, not because I forgot them, because I didn't need paper to remember. Worf, unexpectedly, nodded at that. Klingons keep no such lists either. The dead are honored by memory, not ledger. Starbuck looked at him for a long moment, something like respect passing between them. Yeah, she said. Yeah, that's about right. She dealt him in without asking if he wanted to play. You know any card games, Worf not boring? Or is that against the warrior code too? I know several. I generally win. Big talk from a guy who's never seen a Colonial deck. I adapt quickly. We'll see. Across the room, Riker caught Apollo's eye, Lee. Apollo Adama, arms crossed, studying the newcomers with his father's same careful reserve. Your admiral doesn't trust us yet, Riker said quietly, coming to stand beside him. My admiral's kept 50,000 people alive by not trusting anybody too fast, Apollo said. No offense, none taken. I'd think less of him if he did. What about you? Apollo asked. You trust us yet? Riker considered the question seriously instead of brushing it off, which Apollo noted and appreciated. I trust that you haven't given me a reason not to. That's not the same thing as trust, but it's a start. Fair answer. Apollo watched Starbuck lay down a winning hand and grin like she'd just conquered a planet. For what it's worth, she likes your Klingon. That's usually a good sign. She doesn't like anybody. I'll let Worf know he's been vetted. Don't. He seems like the type who'd take it too seriously. While the crews traded stories and suspicion in equal measure, Picard and Roslin sat across from each other in what had once been Colonial One's cramped conference room, a pot of Colonial tea going cold between them. Picard had politely declined the offer of Earl Grey in return, sensing correctly that this was not the moment to introduce his own comforts. You'll want to know everything, Roslin said. Where we came from, what we're running from, whether we're a threat. I'd like to know what you're willing to tell me, Picard said. In your own time. She almost smiled at that, the first real one he'd seen from her. Most people lead with the threat question. Most people haven't spent 30 years learning that trust offered freely is usually returned in kind. I've been wrong before. I'd rather be wrong that way than the other. Roslin studied him for a long moment, the careful diplomat's read of a man who might be exactly what he seemed, or might be the most dangerous kind of liar. The sincere kind. The Cylons, she said finally, aren't just machines anymore. Some of them look human, perfectly human. They could be sitting in this fleet right now and none of us would know. She watched that information land. So when I tell you we're grateful for your help, I also need you to understand why my first officer had his hand on his sidearm the moment your data walked through that door. We've learned the hard way what trusting the wrong face costs. Picard absorbed this without visible alarm, though something in his posture sharpened. Then we'll proceed carefully, and I'll instruct my crew accordingly. But I want to be direct with you as well, Madam President. The Federation does not conduct diplomacy through infiltration, and if there is even a possibility that these Cylons could reach into Federation space behind you, I need to know everything you can tell me. Not to protect ourselves at your expense, to protect all of us together. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment, turning her cooling tea in her hands. There's something else you should know, Captain, since we're being honest. I wasn't elected to this office. I was 43rd in the line of succession. Everyone ahead of me died in the attack, and I was sworn in on the deck of a transport ship with my hand shaking so hard I could barely hold the book. She met his eyes. I tell you that so you understand everything I do, every decision I make, is made by someone who never expected to be making it. I've had to learn on the job, in real time, with the whole species watching. If I make a mistake with you, it won't be from malice. It'll be from a woman who is still, some days, surprised she's alive to make any decision at all. That, Picard said gently, is the most honest thing a head of state has ever said to me in a first meeting. I intend to treat it accordingly. Rosalind allowed herself, finally, a real breath. All right, Captain, let's talk. She began at the beginning, the algorithm that had turned military hardware into an extinction event in a single coordinated morning. The desperate scramble of the fleet's formation, the long silent years of running with a resistance fleet's worth of ships, held together by desperation and Adama's stubbornness. Picard listened without interrupting, occasionally prompting with a quiet question. Never once reaching for the reassuring platitudes Rosalind had braced herself to hear and dismiss. You haven't asked me for anything, she noted partway through. Most people who hear this story start negotiating before I finish the sentence. Resources, technology, position. I'm not most people, Madam President, and my government does not operate that way. What you need, within reason, we will provide, not as a transaction, but because it is the right thing to do. If, in time, you wish to offer something in return, that conversation can happen when you're ready to have it, not before. And if my admiral doesn't believe you mean that, then he'll watch and judge us by what we do rather than what we say. I'd expect nothing less from a man who has kept 50,000 people alive this long. Down the corridor, unbeknownst to either of them, Adama was having a rather more pointed version of the same conversation with Riker, testing the commander's patience with question after pointed question about weapons capability, fleet strength, chain of command, the blunt reconnaissance of a soldier rather than the careful diplomacy of statecraft. You want to know if we could destroy your fleet, Riker said finally, without heat, cutting through the circling. Adama didn't flinch. I want to know if I need to worry about it. Yes, Riker said simply. We could. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. That would be its own kind of lie, and you'd see through it in a second. But we won't. And I think somewhere in the last hour you've already started to believe that. Or you wouldn't still be standing here talking to me instead of running silent rig ops on every deck. Adama's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. You're observant. Comes with the job. So does patience. I imagine yours does too. More than I'd like. Adama looked out through the viewport at the Enterprise, elegant and enormous against the unfamiliar stars. You have a Klingon on your bridge, a machine that thinks it's a man, an empath who can feel a stranger's grief from across a room, and a captain who beams into an armed refugee fleet without a single guard at his back. That's either the most trusting crew I've ever met or the most confident. Both, usually, Riker said. Ask me again in a week which one wins out. Dr. Gaius Baltar had watched the Enterprise delegation arrive from the shadows of the boarding bay with the particular paranoia of a man who had spent a decade waiting for the universe to finally catch up with him. When Data's gaze passed briefly over him during the introductions, Baltar felt his pulse spike in a way he was certain no one else had noticed. He was wrong. Six noticed everything about him. He thinks the android is a threat, she murmured, close enough that only he could hear her, though of course no one else could hear her at all. Aren't you clever? I don't think anything, Baltar muttered under his breath, hurrying to catch up with the delegation as they moved deeper into the ship, ostensibly toward the science labs. I'm simply curious. Professionally curious. You're terrified he'll scan you and find something you'd rather he didn't. There's nothing to find, Baltar hissed, then caught himself as a passing crewman glanced at him oddly, and covered it with an unconvincing cough. Data, as it happened, found him first falling into step beside Baltar in the corridor, with the unhurried curiosity of someone who had noticed an unusual data point and intended to examine it politely. Dr. Baltar, Data said, I understand you were instrumental in developing several of the Colonial fleet's defense systems prior to the attack. Baltar's smile arrived a half-second too late and stayed a half-second too long. Yes. Yes, that's correct. Command navigation program. Though I hardly think it's relevant now, given how catastrophically it... He stopped himself. Given the circumstances. On the contrary, I find it highly relevant. A defense network sophisticated enough to be compromised so completely suggests either a design flaw of considerable subtlety or an infiltration vector no reasonable safeguard could have anticipated. I am curious which you believe it to have been. Six's voice slid into Baltar's other ear like poison honey. Tell him! Tell him it was me! Tell him how you let me in because I asked so sweetly. And see how quickly his positronic brain recalculates its trust in you. Shut up, Baltar breathed, and then, seeing Data's head tilt with polite incomprehension, added hastily, Not you. Sorry. Talking to myself. Old habit. Terrible habit, really. Comes from working alone too long, you understand. I do not experience the impulse to converse with myself, Data said, though I have observed it is common among humans under stress. Are you under stress, Dr. Baltar? Enormous amounts, constantly, yes, Baltar said, with the particular manic honesty of a man who had found, entirely by accident, the one true thing he could say without lying. Ever since the colonies fell, if we're being candid. Which? Why not? You seem like a very candid sort of individual. I attempt to be. Deception does not come naturally to me, though I am capable of it when necessary. That landed on Baltar like a physical blow, and Six laughed low and delighted in the back of his skull. He's not talking about you. Yet. Fascinating, Baltar managed. Truly. You'll have to forgive me. I find myself rather overwhelmed by the day's events. Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time. Of course, Data said, entirely unbothered, filing the exchange away with the same neutral attentiveness he gave everything. I find you a person of considerable interest, Dr. Baltar. I hope we will have the opportunity to speak again. He walked on. Baltar stood very still in the corridor, breathing hard, until Six's hand imagined, always imagined, and yet he could feel the warmth of it settled on his shoulder. He suspects nothing, she said. Yet, that word is doing an extraordinary amount of work in that sentence, Baltar muttered, and hurried off in the opposite direction before anyone else could ask him a single further question. By the second hour, the wariness aboard Galactica had not vanished. It would take far longer than that. Both crews understood. For anything so hard-won to dissolve entirely, but it had softened into something workable. Riker stood again with Adama near the observation deck, watching the strange new stars wheel slowly past. My chief engineer tells me your FTL drive is unlike anything in our database, Riker said. No warp field, no subspace bubble. Just gone. And then somewhere else. Jump drive, Adama said. Fold space instead of crossing it. It's old technology, older than me. Never been much for finesse. Gets the job done. It got 50,000 people 4 light years across Federation space in a single instant. I'd call that more than finesse. Adama allowed a small, tired smile. Ask me again after the 11th year of running. See if I still call it a miracle by then. Riker studied the older man for a moment, the weight visibly carried in his shoulders. The particular exhaustion of command sustained over impossible odds for impossibly long. Admiral, for what it's worth, whatever brought you here, however it happened, you're not alone anymore. Not unless you choose to be. Adama didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was quieter than before. 11 years, Commander. I've had exactly one job. Keep them alive, keep them moving. Trust no one who hasn't earned it in blood. You're asking me to unlearn that in an afternoon. I'm not asking you to unlearn anything, Riker said. I'm asking you to let today be the first day of evidence, instead of assuming you already know how the story ends. Adama looked at him for a long moment, then out at the stars again, Picard's ship gleaming quietly against them, patient, unarmed, waiting. Fair enough, Commander, he said finally. Fair enough. Behind them, unseen, Roslin and Picard stepped out onto the same deck, their own conversation trailing into a companionable quiet. 4 people from 2 impossible worlds, standing together in the light of stars none of them had charted that morning, no promises made yet, no alliances signed, only the fragile, valuable thing that had somehow, despite everything, begun to grow between them in the space of 2 short hours. Trust, not yet earned in full. But, for the first time in longer than any of them could easily remember, no longer entirely absent either.